Hello, everyone. Welcome to the web seminar, Solve Migration, Security, and Productivity Challenges Around Office 365, produced by IT Pro and sponsored by Citrix. Please note that this web seminar will be available on demand for 12 months starting tomorrow. You'll receive an email when the session is available for review. Also, if you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to type them into the question box on your webcast console. At this time, I would like to introduce our speakers. Teresa Miller has been working as a technical expert in IT for over 20 years. She is a Citrix CTP, VMware vExpert, and has several other business and technical certifications as well. Her area of expertise are in the areas of Exchange, Office 365, Active Directory, VMware, Citrix XenApp, and XenDesktop. She has also done technical writing for Windows IT Pro, Pluralsight, and several other sites. Teresa has also been invited to speak at conferences such as Forum, E2E Virtualization Conference, and has led coordinated tech talks at Citrix Synergy. Teresa also has her own blog for sharing technical thoughts at 24x7itconnections.com, and you can find her on Twitter at 24x7itconnect. Vishal Ganeriwala is a Senior Director of Workspace Marketing responsible for driving cohesive go-to-market and alignment messaging for XenApp, XenDesktop, XenMobile, ShareFile, and Citrix Workspace Suite. He is a part of the team that is evangelizing digital workspace as a primary enabler of customer initiatives such as BYO, Secure Enterprise Mobility, and Secure Remote Access. Vishal has been with Citrix for nearly 15 years, having served in a variety of roles, including engineering, business development, alliance marketing, Citrix Ready, and technical marketing. He has a master's degree in information systems from the University of Florida and a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. You can follow him on Twitter at VishalG. And with that, I will hand things over to Teresa.
Thank you, Ashley. So I'm really excited about the topic we have today. We will be covering challenges and factors to considering a smooth Office 365 migration. As Ashley mentioned, my name is Theresa Miller, and I am a Windows IT Pro contributing editor. Now, when it comes to Office 365, regardless of how your organization is choosing to use it, it is capable of so many things, such as word processing, presentations, collaboration tools, email, and more. So we're seeing a lot more organizations definitely taking this leap and moving in this direction. So if you are planning for Office 365, if you've started the process, today we're going to talk about the factors that will make sure this migration is smooth for you. Here's my goals. My goals and the overview for this conversation today are going to focus around these topics. First, Office 365 migration planning and why this is so important. Then we're going to talk about the technical considerations for success, diving into things like groups, migration types, and even a couple other extra treats that I have for you. These are the things that you might not have necessarily thought of before you started planning, and I want to make sure they're front and center during your migration. And then finally, we're going to talk about why virtualization and virtualization in the cloud should be part of your conversation, something you won't want to miss out on in the planning phases. So in terms of planning, so critical. Whether your organization has great communication between the business and IT or not, things can happen. And let me tell you a little bit of a story. I know somebody that started working at an organization as an exchange administrator and noticed there were Office 365 objects on the mailboxes. Did some digging, and they were told, no, we're not using Office 365. We're not using Office 365. And they're like, okay, well, this is strange. I don't know why I have these. Well, after some further research, it turned out that the business had bought some Office 365, and when they enabled it, they turned on all of the features, including integration, and somewhere along the way had even been able to integrate enough to be able to get those objects on the mailboxes. And the most challenging piece that they were faced with is that this was a test domain. So they had production objects with test objects and stamping on them. So it took a lot of work and even Microsoft engagement to fix that, all because the teams weren't talking. So I tell you that story because I don't want that to be you. It was a very frustrating thing for my colleague. So again, when it comes to your deployment, planning is critical. So things that I want you to be thinking about when it comes to planning is your use cases. How do you want to use Office 365? Documentation, so that you have all of the information in place for not only yourself, your team, the business, but those that follow you down the road when they join the organization. It's easier to hand them some documentation and spend a little bit of time with them to leave them with nothing to get started. Licensing is another thing you should be thinking about. Do you need a failback option for your deployment? Do you care about redundancy? And do you care about high availability? So planning has to be taken seriously, and it needs to happen to be successful. Now, I gave you a lot to think about in the last slide, but what I'm going to focus on are some key questions, some key planning questions that are just going to get you started to make sure that in the early phases of your project, you're making the right decision. So first, think about what your user login experience should be. Do you want it to be seamless or not? And what I mean by seamless is when a user logs into their workstation, are they going to just use their Active Directory ID? Or when they open Outlook and Word and Excel, because you put those in Office 365, are they going to have to log in again with a different ID? Or are they going to have different email addresses in their Office 365 that vary from what they were using on-prem? My guess is that you want a seamless experience because you're going to want those login accounts to be the same, the email addresses to be the same. But I call it out because the way you deploy will change depending on how you answer that question. We'll dive a little bit more into that shortly. The next question I want you to have in mind is, do I need a failback plan? So often do I see organizations think, oh, okay, I'm going to move. But what if something doesn't go as expected? Do you have the ability to go back to your on-prem environment? And I suspect the answer here is yes as well. But again, we'll dive in deeper shortly. And then the final question that I'm going to focus on today is, how is your data being backed up? Is Microsoft doing that for you? Well, the short answer is no. And I'm going to talk in more depth about the types of decisions you need to be making around backup to make sure you're getting the experience for your users in terms of recovery out of this platform. So I promised to dive deeper into those questions. So this particular one is, what should my user login experience be? And as I mentioned, I believe the answer is yes for most companies. And this is actually referred to as identity management. So in terms of identity management, if you want a seamless experience, here's what you're going to need. You're going to need to be using Azure AD Connect. This will create a connection between your Active Directory and your tenant up at Microsoft. Now, if you need some redundancy, and your organization has Microsoft Federation deployed, you could use Federation to add a redundant stream for you, making sure that if for some reason Azure AD Connect went down, Federation could be there to support your organization. Now, the other thing that some organizations look at are third-party tools to help support this experience. I'm not diving in and naming names, but I want you to know that it's an option and you can do the research if it's of interest. Now, you see a very similar question here again. We're moving on, and we have, what should my user experience be? Again, the answer is yes, but I put a second question on here as well, and that refers to the failback plan. And if you answered yes to both of these questions, you're likely going to be doing a hybrid migration. Hybrid migrations create a connection between the two environments that allow this seamless experience with the failback. In order to make sure this is successful, there are two tools that you will need. You will need the Azure AD Connect tool. We talked a little bit about redundancy options. Keep that in mind here. And you'll need the hybrid migration wizard to make sure that there are some other features of a hybrid migration that will make the process even more seamless than you thought it could be. Things like Mailflow, Outlook Web App, and those types of things can actually use the same paths that you did on-prem in a hybrid deployment. All right, so now it's time to dive into backups. And I like talking about this because I don't ever want you to assume that Microsoft is backing up your data. And I suspect you care about this. Now, sure, there's lots of redundancy in place with the database availability groups and things that Microsoft has set up on the back end, but they are not committing to you as their customer that anything can be actually restored. So there's a few things you can do. So one, you can take a look at archiving. That's one way to keep track of your mailbox data. And you can also put mailboxes on retention hold. Now, these are really great options, but there's something missing here. You don't have the option to do a full mailbox recovery. And having dealt with email for as long as I have, I can tell you there will always be a situation at some point, and oftentimes more than one-off situations, this can happen frequently, where a mailbox may need to be recovered. Maybe somebody left. I think, but maybe one of the more common ones is litigation-based. So a user left, you need their mailbox data back, you didn't put a retention hold on it because you didn't know you were going to need it, and now the data is missing. So if that is a use case that's of interest to you, you might want to look at third-party options. A lot of third-party options will allow full data recovery even after permanent deletion of a mailbox. One other thing that you can gain from a third-party backup, before we move on, I just want to mention there's such a thing as deleted item recovery. So within an individual mailbox, if you deleted something that you thought you didn't need, but then found that you were going to need it, there's this area called deleted item recovery, or the deleted item recycle bin. By default in Office 365, you get 14 days, and the max is only 30. And I know a lot of enterprises that use this feature that go as high as 60 and 90 days in their on-prem environment. So another reason to look at third party. All right, so planning. So important. I think this statement says it all. A goal without a plan is just a wish. Your Office 365 project should not be a wish. You need to have a goal with a plan tied to it to be extremely successful. All right, so how do we put together a plan that adds up to success? Well, let's take a look at a few things. Now, these technical considerations are items that could very easily be overlooked if you didn't know about them. And the best thing is that once we dive into them, you'll see that you could even start working on them today. They would affect decisions you'd make in your on-prem environment today and help you be more successful, even if you're not migrating to Office 365 for 6 months or till next year. So, I like this statement because you need to take your time to evaluate your existing environment and take a look at facts about how you set up things like groups. It helps you with your migration types and more. So once you've understood your on-prem environment, you can make decisions that will help you commit to a plan which will lead to the success of your project. So first up, I have Active Directory groups. And you'd think, wow, groups feels like it should be such an easy thing to migrate and get up into Office 365. Well, there actually are some considerations here. So first and foremost, I believe that you probably do have a lot of security and email distribution groups. Essentially, these are sets of users. And in terms of this type of data, you don't have to do anything special. You just migrate these to Office 365. So this will be the simplest piece of your group migration. Then there's the mail-enabled security groups. Now, these will migrate successfully with a hybrid, but if you take a look at some of the other migration types, we'll talk briefly about those in a moment. But those particular, so it's like cutover and staged, I'll mention what they are. Those don't always migrate. You have to recreate them up in the cloud. So important to understand. Now there's also dynamic distribution groups. These are really pretty wonderful. They're groups built from a query. So if I have an Active Directory field on the state of Ohio and I want everyone that works out of my Ohio office in their own distribution group, I just build this group based on the Ohio field, and it creates a list that I can email to. Now, the catch here is there is absolutely no migration path from on-prem for these types of groups, and they have to be manually recreated in Office 365. So knowing that today, you have to look at how many you have and think about, do I want to migrate all of these? Maybe there's a better way to build out these groups and not have to rebuild them during my migration. So important to be thinking about. And the other group type that I find extremely valuable to know about, because it can actually change how you rethink groups. So you're really feeling confident in this Office 365 thing, you can actually create groups that will work across the feature set, the entire system, which is a huge value add. So everything here, Outlook, OneDrive, SharePoint, OneNote, Skype, Yammer, Teams, you name it, you can use these groups. Now, keep in mind, though, that they only work in Office 365 and they only exist in Office 365. So if you get to a point where you may need to fail back, they wouldn't be available. So test early and make sure that these are a good decision for you as you move forward. Now let's talk about migration types. I had promised we would dive into some of these a little bit more. You've heard me talk about hybrid already today. And as you're planning your migration, one of the really great things about hybrid and having that connection between on-prem and your Office 365 tenant is it allows for a gradual migration over time. It also gives you those failback capabilities, which we talked about previously. And we touched lightly on the fact that with hybrid, the OWA URL, for example, can be the same as on-prem, or your mail flow can actually be treated, even though it's going out to the cloud, it can actually be treated as if it's an internal mailbox. There's also calendaring benefits like shared free busy that you wouldn't get if you weren't in a hybrid migration. And one global address list. So now I don't have one on-prem and one separate one in the cloud where nobody can communicate with each other in Outlook. You get the ability to have one list. Then there is the cutover and staged migration. You don't get any of the benefits we just talked about, from mail flow, calendaring, free busy. None of that will coexist. A cutover and staged migration is one where one day you're on-prem, the next day you're in the cloud. It's great for small companies that may not even need to maintain that mail data that they had in on-prem, because it's a cutover. It's also great for disasters. And I actually have a colleague that ran into this cutover staged migration in a disaster. In that case, the entire on-prem environment went down. Nobody could connect to email. And the Office 365 tenant was set up and ready to go because they were going to be migrating. Plan was to do hybrid. But when the on-prem mail system went down, they were able to bring their mailboxes online in Office 365 much faster than trying to recover the disaster that had happened on site. And so very, very powerful tool to be able to get that environment up and running. Unfortunately, they didn't have all of their email come with them. That came later, but at least they were able to continue business as usual and get the job done. Now, there are some security considerations that I want you to be thinking about as well. And this all ties back to hybrid and identity management. The Azure Active Directory Connect tool that's synchronizing your data between on-prem and cloud doesn't store anything in clear text. And as the tool has evolved over time, any passwords that are synchronized are hashed multiple times to ensure that they cannot be cracked open and used by a hacker. And then the other piece from a security perspective that is extremely important to call out is that you can look at third-party options and you can add things such as SSL and two-factor. You can do encryption of data. You can use certificates and more. So you can secure your email to the same degree as you have on-prem with Office 365. And then there's our favorite public folders. So I just want you to be aware as you're migrating that public folders can only reside in one place. So they're only going to be on-prem or in the cloud. And so you have to think about how that affects the organization and how you migrate. So if you have a hybrid migration, the public folders may live on-prem until you're ready to cut them over at the end, for example. And there will be some level of interruption of service, but just understanding that these are more of a cutover than a migrate is key to a successful deployment. All right, so now it's time to talk about why virtualization and the cloud should be part of your conversation while you're planning. So one of the things I like to talk about is, well, with Office 365, you've made a decision that your organizational data has the opportunity to be in the cloud, whether that was business or technical. I suspect more business. you are going to use the cloud. So what you're going to get then as you talk about virtualization and workstations, you're going to be looking at a more secure platform and solution. You're going to maintain less infrastructure and have the opportunity to even provide better redundancy and SLAs. Just because of all of the maintenance and security patching that we need to do, that would become part of what the cloud provider would likely offer. So let's talk a little bit more about why virtualization. I sincerely believe that when you plan virtualization correctly and you've got your golden images down of your desktop, you have the opportunity to deploy workstations in hours instead of what we've seen in the past, and that's been years. So you reduce the number of images that you're managing and deploying, and it really can have this wonderful benefit of deployment reduction in terms of time. So let's talk about some of the benefits of virtualization. So you have the opportunity to secure your workstations in the cloud or in your data center. Laptops, desktops, data as a whole can be taken. We see it in the news all the time. Security breaches are happening, and sometimes it comes down to a workstation that somebody left unlocked where they have the keys to the kingdom, and now data that the organization didn't want shared goes missing or out on the web. So securing those workstations in the data center or in another platform is a huge benefit. BYOD, bring your own device. I can use my laptop but connect to my corporate data if you give me a virtual workstation. Now, from an administrative perspective, you get the benefit of simplifying security patching and operating system updates. So let's just say your organization was able to come up with a handful of base images that get deployed to the organization. With virtualization, you can configure it so that all you have to do is update that handful of workstations and then roll out that change to everybody that was using those various images. You're making a change 5 times instead of potentially, we'll say 500 times. That's a huge benefit. And it helps you keep security a little bit more tight and under wraps because you can now keep up with patching better. And then the other benefit that I really see as an opportunity, especially if we start talking about cloud, is business continuity opportunities. If your entire home office location went off the map, and we see things like hurricanes and natural disasters, those things happen. And if your workstation is virtualized, and even better in the cloud, you can be anywhere in the country and still have access to that data because that site where those workstations were stored wasn't impacted by the natural disaster. Now, I've started dabbling with the YCloud, but I want to call it out separately as well. And I think that a lot of organizations see this as an opportunity to get out of the business of maintaining and replacing on-site infrastructure. And I call that out because it is a huge benefit. Where do you want your employees spending time? But another point I'd like to call it, I didn't put on this particular slide, is I want you to think about why cloud is really about business process and making sure that the organization has what it needs to be successful. Going back to that business continuity example I gave, keeping your users and the business running even if the home location can't function. It ensures security. It also ensures that your teams have what they need, no matter what, to be successful. So now, when it comes to virtualization and Office 365, putting Office 365 on a virtual workstation really does create a secure and seamless experience as long as you're using identity management, and we talked about those components. So spend some time understanding how you want to handle that in that seamless experience for your users. And then when it comes to Office 365 specifically, I also see this being a huge business decision because you've made the commitment to buy a tool set that empowers the business, and you get all of these collaboration tools that empower your teams. So when you put these two together, it makes a powerful message, and it creates an experience for the business that would have been extremely challenging to achieve if you hadn't brought the two together. So here are some of my concluding thoughts. Make sure you plan your Office 365 deployment. There's no straying from that or deviating in any way, shape, or form if you want your deployment to succeed. Make sure you choose a seamless approach for your users. Keep them in mind. Protect and secure your data. This is where we start talking about virtualization. How are we going to secure it? Making sure that experience is amazing. Put them on virtual workstations where it applies. It's not going to be every use case. I've never seen an organization be able to virtualize everything. If you can, wonderful. If that's possible, I think that's amazing. But I think most companies need to look for the use cases to be successful. And then bring these two together. Let's virtualize with Office 365, and you will have a really wonderful option for your business. So thank you very much. I am glad we were able to talk about these things, and now I'm going to actually turn this presentation over to Vishal with Citrix. He has some really great information about their solution that really helps support this particular option for your business.
Thank you, Teresa. My name is Vishal Ganeriwala, and I've been with Citrix for over 15 years and now doing product marketing for Workspace services. And I'm going to talk about why you should be considering Citrix Workspace for your Office 365. So let's take a look. So before I dive a little bit deeper, I want to give some more background on how the update model for Office 365 has changed and what it means for you. So up till now, enterprise IT typically did an update on the Office every 3 to 5 years, and that was dependent on the version of the Office. And it started with, say, Office 2010, and then Office 2013 came out, and now there is Office 2016. There is expected to be another Office 2019. But then Office 365 completely changed the update model. The Office 365 update model looks something like this, and this picture has directly been taken from a Microsoft TechNet website. They have 3 update models. One of the channels they have, or builds they have, they call them monthly channel or monthly updates, which updates every month and gets new features, new security updates or non-security updates. And there are 2 other channels or builds an enterprise IT can deploy, which is semi-annual channel and semi-annual channel targeted. Now, both of these still get updates every 6 months, and actually feature updates. So these are not, security updates, or these are non-security updates, but these are actually features your users might use on an everyday basis. So this is a completely different model where typically you saw new features in Office every 2 to 3 years, now you'll actually see new features in the Office every 6 months. And you still have all these updates coming up in security and non-security updates. And if I look at what Microsoft recommends to enterprise IT from a deployment perspective, so obviously the monthly channel is usually for developers of Office plugins or ISVs and other extreme users who want to use, get the latest features every single month. And what Microsoft recommends for enterprise IT is taking a look at semi-annual channel targeted and, at least the IT to start testing these apps, the newer features and add-ins. So, before this big rollout, they have tested it with the pilot users and so on. And, the release frequency is still twice per year, which will be in March and September, which, I'm showing up in the red lines here. Now, the one which you would really deploy in your organization is semi-annual channel. This is for the broad deployment for all your enterprise users twice a year. Those updates will be in January and July. Now, why is this so significant, right? So why am I talking about all these updates and what's changed? So Teresa talked about benefits of virtualization of Office. And one of the benefits highlighted in here is essentially the change of the update model almost make the updates of thick clients really, really hard. And if you're an enterprise IT, and now you have to update your Office every 6 months versus every 3 years, that's a big change. You may not have all the resources, you may not have all the right tools and right techniques to update the Office on a regular basis, and not even able to test each single one of them. A better way of doing it is through perhaps virtualization and maintaining less copies of these Offices and centralizing these updates and delivering them as needed, right, to your endpoint. So from a BYO perspective, your end users can be using a completely different version of Office, and but you can still deliver them the version of Office which are supported for your business apps, and they're all in consistent manner. Your support and management becomes much, much easier. So that's just one of those things. But let's take a look at the entire picture on why Citrix Workspace for Office 365, or how we can actually help you get there much faster, how we can improve security for it, and eventually even boost workforce productivity. So Teresa talked about a number of things on how you should decide, commit, and go forward with the Office deployments. But I think one of the main things you would probably consider while doing Office migrations is, as Teresa talked about, is identity management, right? And you might completely use ADFS for those things and try and connect AD with your Azure AD and Office 365 accounts. And that's one way of doing it. And I'm going to tell how Citrix adds value on top of those things. And just making it and running it properly, because you may have already bought Office 365 and your CIO probably is telling you, or your upper management is probably telling you, how do I get there faster, right? I mean, how do I get the best ROI out of my investment? And then from a security perspective, Office is everywhere now, right? I mean, gone are the days when we thought Office 365, when we thought about Office, we typically thought, oh, it's going to only be on Windows endpoints. Now there are mobile endpoints, and Microsoft has fantastic apps on mobile endpoints, both iOS, Android, and Office for mobile. And your users might be using those mobile apps. So how do we make sure security is carried forward from your Windows devices and your Mac devices onto your mobile devices? The same policies apply and so on, right? You don't want any data leakage. And then finally, how do they get the same consistent experience on all devices using Office? And from your IT perspective, you want to be rest assured all your security policies are honored, but you don't want any hindrance from the user experience point of view. So let's take a look at deeper into all those three benefits right now. So first, I'm going to talk about the faster migration and easier maintenance things. So from an faster migration perspective, what we typically hear from our customers is that one of the main thing or one of the main problems they are facing today is just connecting their AD and configuring Azure AD accounts and making sure they have the correct security setup done and correct SSO done. So one of the ways Citrix NetScaler technology helps with this thing is it simplifies the whole single sign-on setup by proxying ADFS. And now this way, you may have an on-prem Active Directory, and you may have multiple Active Directories, right? I mean, if you're a large enterprise customer today, you may have multiple Active Directory domains. You may have these domains different for different geos and subdivisions, or if you've done multiple acquisitions. So this becomes really, really tricky now, right? And setting up all these ADFS servers and trying to figure out single sign-on can be a really long and big project unless you start just simply proxying it through NetScaler. So it becomes much simpler and much easier to do it with NetScaler. Now, one of the things, when you take a look at the Office 365 apps themselves, you might be using web apps using Office 365. For example, SharePoint, or you might be using just Outlook.com email addresses and so on. And now you think about rolling out these services for your branch locations. These services are the mission critical services. Now your Outlook.com email and your SharePoint and some of these services. So obviously you don't want, you never want these services to be down. And so how do you create a network resiliency for your branch locations? You can use SD-WAN product line from a Citrix Workspace perspective and really help in creating that increased network resiliency. So even if one of the network lines are down, the traffic can be rerouted through just internet or through some other lines. And from easier migration and easier maintenance perspective, we just talked about how the Office update model itself has changed, and how do you eliminate the image sprawl and reduce the whole patch management effort. So we have fantastic technologies as part of our Citrix Workspace. We have app layering. You can layer an entire Office image, or you can just deliver these apps through XenApp. And if you deliver these apps and virtualize them and deliver them through XenApp, you can deliver multiple versions of the Office to the same user. So there might be some business apps using different versions of the plugins, and you might want to deliver them to your end users. And that's completely possible using XenApp. And finally, you want to accelerate your testing and compatibility testing with your Office apps. Since Office is being updated every 6 months, you want to make sure your plugins are not broken. Your business apps, which are plugged in with your Office, are not, are completely compatible, and you don't want any surprises in the end. So we have another technology called AppDNA, which helps with these things. So in the end, with Citrix Workspace, you eliminate a lot of these problems. You accelerate the migration. You make your maintenance much, much easier. Now, let's jump and take a look at the next benefit that Citrix Workspace provides in terms of Office, which is around security. So, we talked about this, and Teresa talked about it a little bit around multi-factor authentication for Office apps. And Microsoft does a fantastic job, again, providing conditional access and providing single sign-on through Azure AD to some of these Office 365 apps. In this world, you never want your users to log into, say, your Outlook web or Outlook.com, or even your SharePoint websites using a single factor authentication, right? You always want multi-factor authentication with these Office apps. But you probably want similar multi-factor authentication to your other SaaS apps, right? And if maybe you're using Salesforce or Concur or Workday or one of these other SaaS apps, and you want a similar multi-factor authentication even driven down to your Windows apps. And you want all these apps to be delivered to your end user, and you don't want them to remember different ways to authenticate to different kinds of apps. And what Citrix can help you with is provide that unified experience for all your apps, including your Office apps. And so your users have just one way of logging into all your apps through NetScaler being an IDP or NetScaler being as a service provider and plugging into other identity providers and providing this really seamless N-factor or multi-factor authentication to your Office apps. And we can extend the same thing and extend the security and make it conditional access or smarter contextual access for your virtualized Office apps. So not only we can do these things for your web-based Office apps, but if you're delivering Office apps from XenApp, which are virtualized Office apps, you can still have this contextual access done for those kinds of apps. Again, providing similar security policy, which are consistent in manner, and for your whether it's native web apps, or virtualized apps. And you can even control access on your endpoints, whether if you have whether these Office apps are being accessed through corporate-owned laptops or desktops or BYOD machines, and depending on the right security policies, whether if you have the right version of Java or right version of any virus softwares or right BitLocker encryptions enabled or disabled, depending on all those policies, we can control access to these Office apps. And not only even just control access to these Office apps, but even go more granular, whether if you want to enable or disable clipboard or USB, so you don't want anybody to copy the sensitive data and walk out. Now, we talked about these Office apps being everywhere, not just on your Windows and Mac, right? And so what you can do is now through our Zen mobile technologies, you can extend the security posture for your Office, even on a Windows 10 laptops and on mobile devices. So you can deliver these Office apps only to the devices which are compliant, right? And if you want to just automatically deliver Office mobile apps to your iOS, Android, Win 10, Mac, and all those devices, you can use Zen Mobile to even deliver them these native apps. And then finally, you always want your Office data to be encrypted and secured on your mobile devices. And you can do one of those things through, again, using the MDM policies through Citrix Zen Mobile. And when the data is in the motion, like for example, you're using SharePoint or Exchange and all those things, you can still encrypt the data while it's in the motion using our micro VPN technologies, which again comes through Zen Mobile and NetScaler. Now, one of the main things we have been working with Microsoft is our integration with Intune. And so there's EMS integration with Zen Mobile, so they can play better together. So if you're a customer out there who already is looking to invest in Intune, we have a fantastic value add with Zen Mobile and Intune playing all together. And micro VPN especially now being embedded inside the Intune browser itself enables your users to access your internal websites and so forth. And the Citrix mail apps, the secure mail and secure web, they have been enlightened with Intune. So your security policies will carry over. For example, if you're opening up a Word document using a Citrix email and you don't want to copy paste text from there to non-corporate apps like the native Notepad app of an iPad, all those policies will be honored all the way through. So we are doing Microsoft Graph integration, playing very, very nicely with Intune. And so if you're a customer out there, you can do both. Now, finally, let's take a look at how we help enhance workforce productivity using Office. So you bought into the Office 365 strategy, and you want to make sure you have a complete, unified, and consistent experience across all your devices. So one of the easiest ways, and Teresa was, highlighted that, at the very beginning in her presentation, is you want that unified SSO experience. And so we can do that not only for the native apps, but for virtualized apps and for the mobile apps, right? And across all your devices, anywhere, whenever your users are. And from OneDrive perspective, we have number of value add we add on top of OneDrive. So let me talk through some of those things. So your users, when they are using Office these days, They're typically creating content, but then they are also looking for these contents to get reviewed by someone, get some feedback on them, or typically if you have contracts being done, you need some signatures, and so forth. So we have a wonderful technology, ShareFile, which is part of the Citrix Workspace strategy and solution, which allows you to have document workflows or enable document workflows for reviewing and content collaboration, and as well as for e-signatures. And now we also extend the whole OneDrive sharing of documents securely with anyone. So typically when you enable or you want to share documents on OneDrive with external people, you don't want your SharePoint to be open on the internet or enable these things publicly. So what ShareFile does is it has a plugin or a connector for OneDrive. So you can have and use all your OneDrive storage, which you got with Office 365, and store all your documents in OneDrive, but then use ShareFiles to securely collaborate those documents with anyone outside your organization. And very simply, you can do those setups. And from a ShareFile perspective, that becomes your single app or one app to get access to your OneDrive files, your SharePoint, your internal network drives, and so forth, just through one single application. And you can use ShareFile again inside your VDI environments or your XenApp environments for an on-demand sync. Typically in a VDI environment or XenApp environments, you don't want OneDrive to constantly sync your desktop files. Otherwise, it will crush your scalability in a virtualized environment. So, Citrix has this fantastic technology, ShareFile on-demand sync inside your virtual desktops or your XenApp share-hosted desktops or applications, where your files will be instantly available when you need it without sacrificing any scalability hit. And then finally, I want to talk about how we add value to Skype for Business. Now, from a Skype for Business perspective, again, it's being used as critical unified communication tool in most organizations. And you're exchanging your text messages and you're exchanging your call logs and so on, and you want to protect everything. And so you want to make sure, even if you're using a thin client, you can get access to Skype for Business. And with Citrix XenApp and Zen Desktop technologies, again, you can enable this high-def audio and video even in virtualized environments for Skype for Business. So with those things and highlighting some of these benefits, if you are going with Office 365, Citrix Workspace absolutely helps you, get there faster and maintain Office 365, improve from a security point of view, and enables the workforce productivity and gives you the full power of using Office 365 anywhere on any device. So with that, I want to thank you. And Teresa, if you have anything to add in the end, maybe we can open it up for questions.
Thank you, Vishal. If anyone has any questions for Teresa or Vishal, please type them into the question box on your screen. I see we have a few already, so we will go ahead and jump right in. First question, does Microsoft Unlimited archiving and an unlimited mailbox size alleviate the need for third-party backup options?
Hi, so this is Teresa. I'll take that. So I would say it's going to depend on the recovery situations that you end up in. One thing I would caution you with if you're choosing archiving over third party would be you're likely not going to be able to recover an entire mailbox like you would with a third party backup. So if that is a situation you could potentially end up in, then I would absolutely not rely on archiving. The other thing to consider with archiving would be the policies that you put in place. If your policies roll or delete messages after a shorter period of time, then you may run into some issues there. So My recommendation would be to take a close and hard look at your environment. You'll likely need both.
All right, great, thank you. Next question. What are some infrastructure factors that companies need to take into consideration before implementing a digital workspace solution with Office 365?
Teresa, do you want me to take this one?
Sure. If you want to start, I can add to it if there's anything more to share.
Yeah, I think your presentation went into a lot of these infrastructure requirements before implementing the digital workspace solution for Office 365. But I think absolutely you should take your networking into consideration, how it's structured today. How does your ADFS look like today? Do you have multiple domains? And how are you going to plan to do the replication of the accounts from Active Directory to Office 365 accounts? Also, I think, Teresa, you mentioned things around taking a look at your just AD in general and looking at your storage policies, the new Exchange policies, and SharePoint policies, and so on. So there's a lot to take a look here from security, networking in general. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I think the other thing from an infrastructure perspective, more on the Office 365 side is we didn't really talk about if you choose a hybrid solution, know that you're going to be maintaining a Microsoft Exchange infrastructure on-prem for some period of time. And what that means in greater detail is you're going to have to really be watching for the latest service packs and releases that are supported with Office 365 Hybrid. So I think that's also a really great thing to keep in mind.
All right, great, thank you. Next question. Does retention hold keep all items as they were in the mailbox, same folders, etc.?
Yeah, so I can answer this one. And Vishal, if you feel you have anything to add, please feel free. So as it relates to retention hold, typically the user would not even realize their mailbox is on hold. So they're not really going to see any difference. So yes, everything is in the same folders. And then what happens is, of course, the user is going to do their day-to-day activities, which could potentially involve some deletions. There's a tool, a search and discovery tool that you would use that would be able to search anything based on the retention hold that was set.
All right, great, thank you. Next question. Can the workspace be delivered on-premise if Office 365 is delivered in the cloud?
So I can take this question. So absolutely, I mean, the Citrix Workspace solution consists of XenApp, Desktop, product line as well, which you can run absolutely on-prem. NetScaler you can keep on-prem to provide single sign-on solution, and XenApp and Desktop can obviously do all your Office image management. The App DNA software can help you do the Office plugins. So yes, the answer is absolutely yes.
All right, great. Thank you, Vishal. Next question. How does Citrix Workspace affect end user experience in comparison to Office 365 standalone?
So let me take a step back here for this question. So from a Citrix Workspace point of view, I think we are really focused on two users, right? There's one, the first kind of user is the admin. And so we want to absolutely make sure the experience the admin faces for migrating Office 365, managing the Office 365 in general, and securing all the apps on the Office 365 is consistent with Microsoft, and we do value add on top of above and beyond what Office 365 is offering. So from a Citrix perspective, that's the point on the admin experience side. Now, from the end user side, they just want consistent end user experience on all devices, on any network, anywhere. And that's exactly what Citrix Workspace provides from an end user experience point of view, whether it's Skype for Business, whether you're just using local apps, the native Office apps, or whether you're using Office apps in a virtual environment. They're all consistent in any environment you use.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I would also just reiterate that I would expect that that user experience to be very similar to the standalone. So I wouldn't expect a negative experience from what I've seen. It would be positive.
All right, great. Thank you again to Teresa and Vishal for your presentations. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for this session. Just a reminder, this web seminar will be available on demand starting tomorrow, so feel free to come back and review. For more information and additional resources, please visit citrix.com. Thank you for attending and have a great day.